With our code now nicely organized with some variables and nesting, we're now ready to implement the CSS architecture that we've been talking about earlier. And what I mean is a 7-1 pattern, where we create 7 folders and one main Sass file to import all the files that are in these folders. So let's start by creating the base folder, which is where we're going to put our basic project definitions. So like a project boilerplate. So new folder, base. Okay, so all of these folders are going to be inside of the Sass folder, of course. Now inside of this base folder, we should have a file which is also called base. So a base Sass file. And this file will be for the real low-level basics, such as resets and styles for the HTML and body element selectors. Now this file should be a partial, so that we can later import it into the main Sass file. So remember the first lecture ever that we had about Sass? Back then I talked about partials and imports. And so that's what I'm meaning here. So the partial files, they always start with an underscore. So like this. And if I want to call this file base, then I just have to write underscore base.scss. And that's it. So now this is a partial Sass file. Okay, and so let's actually import it into our main file, and I will put it here at the top. And all we have to do now is simply write @import and then the path to the file. So it is in the base folder, right? Because remember, we are in the main file, so we are here in the folder system. And so from here, we just have to move into the base folder, and then from there, we select the base file. And now we don't have to use the underscore. All we have to do is base. So no underscore and no SCSS. This is enough for Sass to understand what we want to import here, okay? And that's it. Now some other files that we usually want in the base folder are files for animations. So animations.scss. Then we usually also have a file for typography. So typography.scss. And so we're going to fill all of these files over the next lectures, okay? And another one for utilities as well. And again, you'll see in one of the next lectures. So utilities.scss. And that's enough for the base folder. And they keep opening up here, but we can just close them. This one as well. All right. Now, once you see the whole picture with all of the folders and all the files, then everything will fall into place and make more sense to you. Now, I want you to keep in mind that this architecture is really designed to handle large multi-page websites or web apps. And so maybe for a small landing page, like the project that we're working on here, this might seem like a bit too much, a bit overkill, right? But once you start working on a really huge project, then you'll appreciate how this really makes things easier, okay? So it's really important to have an architecture like this in place, especially when we're working on a larger project. Okay, but let's move on and create another folder here. And this one is called abstract. And in this folder, we're only going to put code that's not going to output any CSS. So we already saw what type of code is that. So variables, mixins, and stuff like that. So let's actually put these files in here. And now to make my life a bit easier, I will actually do it using the command line, okay? But you, of course, if you don't like the terminal already, you can do it by hand in your code editor. I will just move to Sass and then abstract. And then I will use touch to add some files here. And on Windows, you can use the edit command. So as I was saying, the files that we want here is for variables, for mixins, and for functions. And you can see that I can write all of these files that I want to create here in one line in the touch command. So here are these 3 files that I just created, right? All right, next up, let's create a components folder. And in that folder, we're then going to create one file for each of our components. And remember that components are our reusable building blocks that make up our websites or apps. And they should also be usable anywhere on the page so that they are completely independent and held together by the layout of the page, right? So let's create that folder. Components. And for now, we're going to leave it empty because we don't really have a component yet. Well, actually we do have, but let's worry about that later, okay? So this is the components folder, and remember that the components are held together by the layout of the page. And since I was talking about layouts, we also need a layout folder for each piece of the global layout of the entire project. So in the layout folder, we're going to have a global footer, header, etc. So stuff like that. So mkdir layout. So remember that this architecture is designed for multi-page projects. And so these layout elements should work everywhere and on all pages, right? So again, our components are our building blocks, which are independent and reusable everywhere across our website. And then the layout is what holds all of these components together. But again, we're going to see how that works when we really dive deep into the project. Now, if we have very specific styles for a specific page, like for example a home page, we can then create a new file for that specific page, and we do that in the pages folder. So mkdir pages. And that's actually what's going to happen in our case, because we can treat the landing page that we're building as like the home page, and there will certainly be styles that are only going to apply to that page. And then later on, if our fictional company will expand and add more pages, then they can have different styles for the other different pages. So let's actually create that one. So pages and then touch home.scss and go back. And so these are the most important folders that we're going to use the most. But you see that we only have 5 folders so far, so there are still 2 missing. So the 7.1 architecture also has a folder for themes in case that you're doing like a web app with different themes. And there's also a vendors folder where you can put third-party CSS, like for example the CSS file of a Bootstrap or an icon system or an animation framework, all right? But for now, we're going to leave these empty in this project. Now, what we have to do is to, of course, import all of these files here into the main file, right? So for now, we don't have much here, but let's now import what we have. And actually, I'm just going to copy this one. So for the base, we have animations. Actually, it's once more. So animations, base, typography, and utilities. All right. Now in the abstracts, which actually comes before, so let's put it before here. So import abstracts and then functions. And let me just copy this entire mixins and then variables. All right. So abstracts, base, components is still empty, so nothing there, layout as well, and now pages. So import pages and home. So what I suggest we do next is to actually sort all of this code into different files, because the goal is that in the end, this main file only serves to import all the other files. So there will be no code here in this file except for all these import declarations, okay? So let's put all of this code where it belongs. So these are variables, and we know that there's a file just for that. So that's it. And let's see if our Sass already compiled here. Well, it seems like something is going wrong here. Well, let's just close this one and try it again. Okay. Actually, we can do it here. Clear. And remember how it works? We just have to write npm run and then the name of our script that we wrote here. So it's called compile and Sass. So compile Sass. And now it's waiting for that we make some change here because because of this W flag here, it only works on changes. So let's just change something here. I don't know. We can just, yeah, like delete this from here actually. And so save it and let's see what it does. And so yeah, so here we go. Now it's working again. And this should be reloading automatically. And so you see that it still works, which means that our import here was successful. We can actually check it out here as well. And yeah, so everything is still working just fine. So this is our variables file, and we're going to add a lot of variables in here over the next lectures, but for now let's close it, okay? So these things here, they are going into the base file, okay? So base, because they are the basic definitions about our entire project. Next we have this animations file here, and we have some animations here, right? So let's put them in there. So keyframes and all of this code. So now it's all nicely separated. Whenever we want to see an animation, check out how they work or change something, we already know all we have to do is to go into this animations file. So great. Now the button, and actually we can say that the button is a component because it's certainly a block, and so we can call it a component. So it's reusable across the page, it's independent, it works everywhere, and it's a building block that we can use wherever we want on our page. So let's actually create a new file here in the components, okay? This time I'm going to do it here in the editor. So button.scss. I'm going to put the code in there. So the entire button code goes here, okay? And now, of course, never forget that we have to import it, right? So base and then components. So here, import okay. And so now we imported this file. We can close it. So what else do we have here? We have the header. Now the header, I'm not going to treat as a component. I'm actually going to treat it as a layout element. So we know that probably on each page that we'll have in this website. So once again, imagine that the website is going to expand, and then on each page we're going to have this header, right? And so this is a layout. So let's add a file here in the layout for the header. Header.scss. Okay. Now this is a bit subjective, of course. I mean, there's no right and wrong in how you divide your code. So if you will say that this is a component, then maybe you're not wrong, and you can of course then go ahead and create a component for this code. But I think this is better organized as being an element of our layout. So it's simply just a question of how we name things here, but I like to say that it's layout, and so I create a file in the layout folder. And then of course I have to include it in here as well. So import, so layout and then header. Now all of this process might seem a bit cumbersome to you, a bit boring and a bit too much work, but of course ideally you start by doing this right from the beginning. You don't start to write your CSS the way we did it and then you sort everything into these folders. No, ideally you start right from the beginning of the project by having this organization, this architecture, right? This is just because I didn't want to start the course with this difficult stuff, with this more confusing stuff. I just wanted to start the course with coding. And so now we have to quickly go through this process and convert everything to this new architecture, okay? Now what else do we have? The heading primary. Oh, and actually that's it. So the heading primary, I will classify it as being an element of our typography, okay? So let's open this typography here and put this here. So again, you could argue that this is a component, and I couldn't say that you're wrong, but I like to organize this piece of code here into my typography file, because it's really related to typography in this case. And so this seems the most intuitive place for me when I will be looking for the heading. All right, and something else that we should do is if we look at this base here, you will see that we also have a lot of typography stuff in here. So actually we should move this to typography. So everything that is typography related, we should have right in this file. So this entire code here, not all of the code, but everything except this one here, should go to the typography. So everything except this part. And so then here, we just delete everything except this one. Okay, so everything that is related with typography is now in here. So let's close it. And now you could argue once more that this font size here is also for typography. And while I also agree with that, we saw before when we did our conversion to rams that this acts more like an overall setting for how we size our entire page, right? So I don't see this as much as typography. I see this more like really a base definition, a global definition, which defines what one rem should be. Let me actually write it down here, okay? This defines what one rem is. And that's why I'm going to leave it here, because that's what it is really. So we have a reset here, and this box sizing is actually also part of it. And then here this overall one rem setting is also here in our base. So we have base animations, we have typography, then we're going to add some utilities here later. We already have one component, we have one piece of the layout. Homes is still empty by now. Variables, mixins, and we don't have any mixin yet, and also no function. So let's leave them empty for now. So this package JSON, I can also close it, this one as well, this one. And okay, so don't need any of this. And all right, so that is our architecture. So again, you might not need all of these different files and folders for a really small project like this one. But I really want you to get used to this structure, because if you don't organize your Sass files like this, if you just have a bunch of unrelated files or even everything in just one file, it will become a real nightmare when you someday have to maintain all this code. Imagine that you have 10,000 lines of code one day, and then you want to maintain all of this. You want to change something very deep in the code, and then it will be really difficult. So it's always best to start this from the beginning and then keep using the system all throughout the project. And that's what I wanted to show you in this lecture and overall in this entire course, really. Because I've been talking a lot about maintenance and all that stuff because it's really important for a professional CSS developer like you want to become.